The morning had a gentle rhythm. Sunlight streamed through the tall living room windows, falling in golden shafts that danced across the carpet. Dust motes swirled lazily in the beams, catching the light like tiny, floating stars. Outside, birds chirped softly, their songs almost blending into the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint drip from the kitchen faucet. It was the kind of morning that felt slow, comforting, almost sacred. She moved through the space, carrying her mug of coffee, the warmth of the cup grounding her in the calm. She glanced at the newspaper folded neatly on the counter and inhaled the faint aroma of toast. Then, she noticed him. The dog lay sprawled on the carpet, a small, scruffy bundle of brown and black fur. Between his paws rested what looked, at first, like a simple worn squeaky toy. But something in his posture made her pause. He wasn't playing. He wasn't nudging it. He just held it with quiet reverence, his paws soft yet firm, ears alert, head slightly tilted. Oh, he's just guarding his favorite toy again, she thought, smiling. But as she moved closer, she noticed his eyes. They followed her movements with calm focus, soft but insistent. Not demanding, not expectant, just observing. It felt purposeful. Something about it stirred curiosity in her chest, a quiet, unspoken question. She knelt beside him, letting her hand hover above his back. The warmth of his fur radiated through her fingers, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended. The room, the light, even the soft sounds of morning seemed to pause around them. He nudged the object gently with his nose, then lifted his gaze, meeting hers in a quiet, deliberate way. Her heart softened. Something in the calm morning held weight she couldn't yet name. Every subtle motion, the flick of his tail, the tilt of his head, the gentle shift of his paws, felt meaningful. Not playful. Not casual. Important. She leaned closer, tracing the edges of the worn object with her eyes. A faded cloth, soft and frayed from years of handling. She thought she knew the toy, but in that moment, something felt different. Not just a toy. Something more. The dog's gaze stayed on her. Soft. Patient. Waiting. Not for her attention, exactly, but for her understanding. He shifted slightly, pressing the object closer to his chest, the small act almost like a silent invitation. She couldn't help but chuckle softly. "What are you guarding, huh?" she murmured. The words felt strange in the quiet room, too casual for the gravity of the moment. The dog responded only with a slow, gentle wag of his tail. It was calm, measured and acknowledgement, not excitement. She sat back slightly, letting the quiet wash over her. Golden sunlight, faint morning sounds, and the presence of this small, intuitive being filled the room. She sipped her coffee, watching him, noticing the tiniest details, the slight rise and fall of his chest, the subtle tilt of his ears, the way he shifted his weight to stay balanced over the object. And then she realized, it wasn't just about a toy. Her fingers hovered over the carpet. She wanted to touch it, to see what he was protecting, but she hesitated. Something told her that this was bigger than she understood. Bigger than a game or a plaything. The dog's gaze held her in quiet attention, his purpose unmistakable. He wasn't guarding a toy, he was guarding meaning. And in that moment, in the golden morning light, she felt a small flutter of awe in her chest. Everything about this quiet, ordinary morning had shifted. There was a story here, whispered in subtle gestures and soft breaths. And she knew, without fully understanding what the dog sensed, would change everything. The morning sun shifted slowly across the living room, stretching golden fingers over the carpet and into the corners of the room. The soft warmth filled every corner, brushing over the dog as he remained in his small, purposeful pose. He didn't move much, but every little action felt intentional, the gentle tilt of his head, the quiet twitch of an ear, the careful placement of his paws over the object. She watched him, her curiosity growing. She had seen him guard toys before, but this was different. There was a weight to his focus, a quiet seriousness that tugged at her heart. She kneeled on the floor beside him, letting the warmth of her legs brush against the soft carpet. The dog looked up, eyes soft but attentive, as if silently saying, "Notice this, please notice." He nudged the object forward with a delicate paw, then paused, waiting. It was a small gesture, yet it felt profound. She reached out slowly, fingertips hovering over the worn cloth, and he shifted slightly, pressing it closer to himself. There was no urgency, no fear, just quiet insistence. He wanted her to see. To understand. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You're serious about this, huh?" she whispered. The dog only blinked, tail brushing the carpet, calm and steady. She leaned closer, observing the subtle details, the frayed edges, the faded colors, the faint scent that reminded her vaguely of sunlight and old memories. Somehow, she felt the significance before even knowing what it was. Every movement the dog made seemed purposeful. He rose slightly, just enough to adjust the object's position, then lowered himself again, eyes never leaving her. There was a gentle rhythm to his actions, like a silent language. And she realized, with a small thrill of wonder, that he was guiding her. Not with words, not with barks, but with quiet, intuitive gestures that demanded attention. She sat back for a moment, letting the realization sink in. This wasn't play. This wasn't a game. The dog was showing her something she couldn't yet name. The way he tilted his head, the way he held the object close, it all felt like a message. A gentle, patient invitation to understand. For a long moment, they simply existed together in the quiet room. Sunlight streamed over them, warming her face, highlighting the dog's soft fur, casting gentle shadows that shifted with the passing hour. She could feel the rhythm of his breathing, steady and calm, and it grounded her. The room was filled with quiet anticipation, like a secret waiting to be revealed. Her hand hovered near the object again, and he nudged it slightly toward her, slow and deliberate. She hesitated, unsure, then allowed herself to touch it. The texture was soft, worn by time, almost comforting. She felt a strange warmth at her fingertips, a sense that this simple object carried a story. The dog shifted closer, resting his chin lightly on the object as if to ensure it was safe, yet trusting her to see its importance. His eyes met hers, soft, knowing, patient. She felt a small flutter in her chest, a mixture of awe and curiosity. It was as if he had chosen her, entrusted her with a secret that needed gentle attention. She whispered, "Okay. I see you." Her voice was barely audible, soft as a morning breeze. The dog blinked slowly, tail sweeping the floor, and settled back into his careful position. His intuition had guided her to this moment, and she understood, even if only partially, that there was meaning behind his actions. The world outside continued on, oblivious to this quiet exchange. But in the living room, in the soft golden light, a bond was forming, not just between human and dog, but between understanding and mystery. Every nudge, every tilt of the head, every gentle movement of his paws was a note in a silent, emotional symphony she was only beginning to hear. And as she watched him, the realization settled in more firmly: this wasn't just a toy. His intuition, his focus, it carried a message that was waiting for her to uncover. A meaning that was important, tender, and deeply personal. And somehow, she knew, this quiet, deliberate guidance would lead her to something she hadn't yet imagined. In that moment of shared stillness, she leaned back, inhaled slowly, and let herself feel the warmth of the morning, the quiet pulse of life in the room, and the steady, intuitive presence of her dog. He had shown her something essential, something she was only beginning to sense. And she understood, the story he was trying to tell her was just beginning. The morning sunlight had shifted again, soft amber spilling across the living room floor, brushing over the dog as he remained poised beside the small object. The warmth of the light caught in his fur, highlighting the subtle mix of brown and black, and in that quiet glow, she found herself staring longer than she expected. There was something in the stillness of the room that made time feel slower, almost sacred. She had been watching him for several minutes now, and the longer she looked, the more her curiosity grew. His focus wasn't playful. It wasn't casual. There was a deliberate calm in his movements, a gentle insistence that pulled at her attention. Every small action he made was purposeful, the tilt of his head, the faint twitch of his ears, the way he shifted his weight just slightly, keeping the object close to him. She sat down on the edge of the couch, coffee in hand, her gaze fixed on him. Her mind wandered, trying to piece together what it could mean. She had dogs before. She knew the little quirks, the odd behaviors. But this felt different. She realized, with a small flutter of unease and excitement, that she had no idea what he was trying to show her. He nudged the object gently with his nose, then paused and looked at her. It wasn't a demand, it wasn't impatience. It was an invitation. He wanted her to see, to understand, to notice something she hadn't before. And she felt her heart swell slightly at the trust in his gaze. He had chosen her to witness this, to share this moment, and she didn't even know what this was yet. Her hand hovered over the worn cloth again. The frayed edges, softened by years of use, seemed almost delicate in her fingers. She could feel the faint texture, the subtle difference in thread where it had been handled countless times. It smelled faintly of the outdoors, a soft, warm scent that reminded her of sunlight on old wood. There was a familiarity to it, and yet, something about the way he guarded it made her certain it wasn't just a toy. She leaned closer, resting her elbows on her knees, and tried to focus. The dog shifted slightly, pressing the object closer to his chest, then settled his chin gently upon it. His gaze stayed locked on hers, soft and deliberate, as if trying to communicate something beyond words. She found herself studying him more intently than she ever had before. The rise and fall of his chest, the gentle flick of his ears, the subtle movement of his tail, all of it felt like a language she was only just beginning to understand. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. "You're serious about this, huh?" she murmured. The words sounded small in the vast morning light. He blinked slowly, tail sweeping the floor, and then nudged the object again. Her curiosity deepened. She realized she wasn't just observing, she was participating in something meaningful. Something important. She let her mind wander back to the morning she had shared with him before. He had always been affectionate, intuitive, loving in small ways, but she had never seen this level of focus. She had never seen him so deliberately patient, so completely present. There was a gentle mystery in his actions, one that tugged at her heart and made her want to know more. The room seemed to shrink around her attention, the outside world fading into quiet background noise. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, even the distant chirping of birds, all became part of the rhythm of the moment. She felt as if she were suspended in a small bubble of golden light, just her and him, connected in a subtle, wordless way. Slowly, she reached her hand closer, letting her fingertips graze the worn cloth. The dog leaned into her touch slightly, eyes softening, and her heart skipped a beat. The moment felt fragile and intimate, like a secret unfolding between them. She couldn't explain why, but she felt an almost physical pull toward understanding whatever he was guarding. Her gaze lingered on the object. It was small, soft, and unassuming. Yet somehow, in the way he held it, it seemed monumental. There was a quiet gravity in his patience, in the way he seemed to silently wait for her to notice. She realized she was no longer thinking about what it was in practical terms. She was thinking about what it meant, about the story it carried, and about why he felt it was so important to share it with her. Time passed slowly. Sunlight shifted and stretched across the floor. She took another sip of coffee, and still, she could not tear her eyes away. Every subtle motion he made spoke volumes, gentle intuition made visible, an emotional pulse she could feel in the warmth of the room. She began to notice the tiniest details, the way his ears twitched when she moved slightly, the faint wag of his tail that seemed almost like a punctuation, the soft weight of his body pressed against the carpet as if anchoring the moment in place. Her heart beat faster with curiosity. She realized she was no longer just watching a dog and an object, she was watching purpose. And she felt honored to be there, to witness it, to feel the quiet importance of the moment. Finally, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "I don't know what you're trying to show me, but I want to understand." The dog's eyes softened, as if acknowledging her words. He shifted slightly, chin resting a little more firmly on the object, and for the first time, she sensed that she was allowed closer, not just physically, but emotionally, to the meaning behind it. The room was still, warm, and filled with golden light. Outside, the world moved on without notice, but inside, a small quiet connection deepened, a bond strengthened by curiosity, trust, and a hint of mystery. She realized that this was not just a morning. It was the beginning of something bigger, a story unfolding gently, patiently, with him guiding the way. And in that moment, she knew, what he was guarding was not a toy, and discovering the truth behind it would change the way she saw him, and perhaps even herself. By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, spilling a softer, gentler light across the living room. The golden glow painted the walls and carpet in comforting hues, and the air carried a faint warmth that seemed to wrap around both her and the dog. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and the soft chirping of birds outside formed a subtle soundtrack to the stillness of the moment. She sat cross-legged on the carpet now, closer to him, letting her fingers brush lightly over his fur. The dog leaned into her touch, soft and patient, with a slow, steady gaze that felt almost human in its intensity. The object he had been guarding remained cradled between his paws, small and unassuming, yet radiating importance through his deliberate attention. Every small gesture he made, tilting his head, nudging the object slightly, flicking an ear, seemed intentional, almost like a silent conversation. She could feel a growing awareness of his inner world, the quiet intelligence behind each subtle motion. It was as if he was inviting her to see not only the object but the story and meaning behind it. She smiled softly, brushing her hand along his back. "I think I understand, just a little," she murmured. His eyes flicked up to hers briefly, calm and patient, before returning to the object. It was as though he was acknowledging her effort, encouraging her to pay closer attention, to keep noticing. Minutes passed slowly, the room bathed in warm light, and she found herself observing not just the dog but the connection forming between them. There was a quiet intimacy in this shared stillness, a soft thread weaving them together in understanding and trust. She could feel the pulse of his attention, the gentle rhythm of his breathing, the subtle weight of his paws pressing down on the carpet. Each motion spoke of care, focus, and a gentle insistence that made her heart swell. She leaned in slightly, watching him nudge the object again. Her fingertips hovered near it, feeling the worn fabric, tracing the edges lightly. The dog shifted closer, as if encouraging her to notice the details she might have overlooked, the faded color, the softness from repeated handling, the faint scent of past moments embedded in the fibers. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a story, a memory, a feeling he wanted to share. "I'm here," she whispered softly. "I'm seeing it with you." The dog blinked slowly, tail brushing the floor in a gentle, measured rhythm. She realized that this wasn't just her observing him, this was a mutual awareness, a silent dialogue, a bond deepening with every shared glance and movement. She let herself relax into the warmth of the morning, the soft hum of life around them fading into the background. She felt a quiet peace settle over her, as if the dog's calm presence had wrapped itself around her heart. She could sense his intuition guiding the moment, teaching her to slow down, to notice, to feel. The golden light shifted slightly as a breeze fluttered through the window, lifting the edge of a curtain. The dog's ears twitched, and he glanced toward the window for just a moment, then returned his focus to the object. She noticed how attuned he was to the smallest changes in his surroundings, how he integrated them without losing focus, how every action was balanced between awareness and gentle purpose. She reached out again, brushing her fingertips lightly against the worn cloth. This time, the dog nudged it closer to her deliberately, almost as if he were saying, "See it. Feel it. Understand it." Her chest tightened slightly, and a small, quiet warmth spread through her. She realized that this moment wasn't about solving a mystery yet, it was about presence, connection, and trust. The quiet intimacy of the morning deepened as she leaned closer, resting her head lightly near his shoulder. The dog shifted slightly, comfortable with her closeness, his breathing steady and calm. She could feel the pulse of life in his small body, a rhythm that matched the gentle beat of her own heart. In the warmth of the sunlight and the quiet of the room, she felt a profound sense of belonging and understanding. The minutes stretched, allowing each subtle movement and glance to carry weight. She noticed the faint way his tail brushed the carpet in small waves, the soft rise and fall of his chest, and the gentle press of his paws around the object. It was as if he were sharing not only the object but the feeling behind it, the care, the attention, the memory, the intuition. A soft sigh escaped her lips. "I think I understand more now," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You're not just guarding it, you're sharing it with me." The dog blinked slowly, a subtle wag of the tail acknowledging her words, and for the first time, she felt she was beginning to see not just the object, but the meaning behind it. The morning light continued to spill across the room, golden and warm, wrapping them both in a soft, gentle glow. In that quiet, suspended space, she realized the depth of their connection. The bond between them had grown beyond familiarity or companionship. It was now intimate, emotional, and deeply intuitive. She could feel the weight of trust, the quiet heartbeat of understanding, and the tender rhythm of shared attention. And in that moment, she knew, this connection, this quiet dialogue, would guide her toward the truth he was guarding. She could sense that what he held was precious, meaningful, and waiting for her to discover. The emotional thread between them had strengthened, binding them together in a way words could not yet describe. She leaned back slightly, eyes still on him, heart full, and knew that the next steps of this quiet journey would reveal something profound, something that would change both of their mornings forever. The afternoon light had softened now, spilling through the living room windows in mellow, honey tones. The golden glow seemed richer than before, stretching across the carpet, glinting off the dog's fur, and warming the edges of the worn cloth he had been guarding so carefully. The air smelled faintly of sunlight and dust, comforting and familiar, wrapping the room in quiet intimacy. She sat beside him, legs folded beneath her, still observing his careful focus. The dog had not moved from his position for nearly an hour, yet he seemed content, patient, and entirely intentional. Every slight tilt of his head, every measured nudge of the object, felt like a deliberate message, a small story unfolding in silence. Her curiosity had deepened into gentle determination. She wanted to understand the importance of the object he protected, but she also felt the need to approach slowly, tenderly. This wasn't a moment for force or impatience, it was a delicate unveiling, guided by intuition, both hers and his. She reached toward the worn cloth carefully, brushing her fingers over the frayed edges. The dog shifted slightly, letting her touch it but pressing just enough to maintain a subtle sense of ownership. It was a quiet negotiation, almost ritualistic, a dance of trust. Her mind raced with questions, but her heart remained calm, attuned to the slow rhythm of the room and the soft movements of her companion. For the first time, she allowed herself to really examine it, the texture, softened by years of handling, the faint stains that hinted at the moments it had been carried outdoors, the way the fabric bent and curled in familiar, comforting folds. It wasn't just a toy. She could feel that it carried a memory, a sentiment, something imbued with meaning beyond play. The dog nudged it again, gently, patiently, eyes locking with hers. She leaned closer, inhaling a faint scent that reminded her of warm afternoons and sunlit corners. Her fingers traced the edges of the cloth, noting the care it must have required to remain intact despite years of use. The realization began to sink in slowly, this object was not casual. It had a story, a significance that had been quietly entrusted to her attention. She looked at him, noticing the intensity of his gaze. It wasn't demanding, nor anxious, it was soft, deliberate, intimate. It was as if he were inviting her to step further into the story he carried. And in that gaze, she felt an awakening sense of connection, as though the bond between them had deepened to include not just companionship but shared understanding. Her hand lingered on the cloth. The dog shifted slightly, letting her touch it freely now, almost guiding her through the motions of recognition. She realized that this moment was more than curiosity, it was revelation. Each subtle motion, each tilt of his head, each careful nudge, spoke to her on a level that words could not reach. She inhaled softly, letting her awareness settle. The warm sunlight, the soft sounds of the house, the calm presence of the dog all combined into a quiet orchestration that made her feel both grounded and elevated. Her heart began to understand what her mind had only glimpsed, that the dog's intuition had been guiding her gently to this recognition all along. Minutes passed in silent observation. She traced the cloth's edges once more, feeling the softness and noticing details she had overlooked before: the faded colors, the subtle stitching, the slight indentation where the dog's paws had rested countless times. It was intimate, familiar, comforting. And in that quiet attention, she felt a connection not only to the object but to the dog, to the story embedded within it, and to the quiet passage of time itself. She spoke softly, almost to herself, "It's more than I thought. It's not just a toy, is it?" The dog's gaze remained steady, unblinking, almost approving, almost as if to say, "You see it now, slowly, carefully, as I intended." She smiled, letting herself feel the warmth of the moment. The cloth in her hands was no longer just an object, it was a bridge linking past and present, memory and intuition, human and dog. The gentle revelation had begun. The soft unfolding of meaning, hinted at through hours of patient attention, was now opening before her eyes. As she sat there, sunlight catching in the dog's fur and highlighting the golden edges of the room, she felt a wave of gratitude. The quiet patience, the steady gaze, the intuitive gestures, all of it had led to this point. She realized that the dog had been teaching her, guiding her, inviting her to perceive something profound hidden in simplicity. Her hand rested on the cloth, and the dog nudged it one last time, almost ceremoniously, before settling his chin over it again. She looked at him, eyes soft, voice calm. "Thank you for showing me." He blinked slowly, tail sweeping gently across the carpet, his presence grounding her in the warmth of the room. And in that soft, golden afternoon, she felt the first true glimpse of the story behind the object, a story she was ready to understand, piece by piece, with the patient guidance of her intuitive, gentle companion. She knew now, the gentle reveal had begun, and it would lead them both to something beautiful, tender, and unforgettable. The late afternoon light shifted, softening into warm amber streaks that poured gently across the living room floor. Shadows lengthened, stretching over the carpet and curling around the small figure of the dog as he remained poised over the cloth. The room felt suspended in time, as if the world outside had slowed to give space for what was unfolding inside. She had been watching him for hours now, observing every subtle gesture, every careful nudge, every patient pause. And yet, something was changing. She could feel it in the rhythm of her own heartbeat, in the gentle tightening of her chest, in the way her breath had slowed and softened to match his calm. There was a moment coming, she could sense it even if she didn't yet know its shape. The dog lifted his head slightly, ears flicking toward her, eyes soft but unwavering. His gaze carried a quiet insistence, a gentle pull that seemed almost tangible. It was the kind of look that could anchor a person, that could communicate without words, that could insist on presence and attention. She leaned forward, heart full, and felt a shiver of anticipation in her chest. Her hand hovered above the cloth, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully reach for it, brushing her fingers lightly across the worn surface. The dog shifted subtly, nudging it closer, then settled back, eyes locked on hers as if to say, "You're ready now." A wave of realization began to wash over her, slow and steady. This wasn't just a toy. This wasn't casual or incidental. The careful attention, the deliberate gestures, the intuitive patience, everything had been pointing her toward a truth she was now beginning to grasp. Her pulse quickened slightly, a mix of awe and quiet reverence filling her chest. She picked up the cloth gently, letting the dog watch, feeling the warmth of his trust and the weight of his gaze. She noticed the subtle details she had overlooked before, the way the edges were worn just so, the faint stains that hinted at countless afternoons spent in sunlit rooms, the softness that came from love and attention, not neglect. It was intimate. It was precious. And she realized, fully, that it was far more than she had imagined. The dog nudged it again, lightly, patiently, as if guiding her understanding. She inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. For the first time, she let herself think about what it represented. Memories began to surface in her mind, not her own memories, but a sense of history embedded in the object, carried silently by her small, intuitive companion. There was a story here, a gentle truth, a meaning that had been entrusted to her without words. Her eyes met his again, and she felt the bond deepen in an almost physical way. He had guided her to this moment patiently, deliberately, with quiet devotion. She could sense his pride, his joy, and the subtle relief that she was finally seeing it as he intended. And in that shared gaze, something shifted inside her, a quiet emotional turning point, the gentle dawn of understanding that would change everything. She traced the cloth carefully, fingers lingering over the softened edges, letting herself absorb the intimacy of its texture. It carried warmth, memories, and an invisible story that connected the past to the present. And in that delicate realization, she felt a swell of gratitude for him, for his intuition, his patience, and the quiet way he had led her here without urgency, without fear, without drama. The dog shifted closer, resting his chin lightly on her hand as if to affirm her understanding. She smiled softly, brushing her fingers along his fur, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the emotional weight of what was unfolding. The quiet room, the soft golden light, the gentle sounds of the house, all of it became part of a delicate symphony that made her chest ache in the best possible way. She whispered, almost to herself, "I think I understand now, a little more. You've been showing me all along." The dog blinked slowly, tail brushing gently against the floor, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was subtle, tender, and full of unspoken meaning. In that quiet afternoon light, she realized the full truth of the moment. She had been led here not just to witness an object, but to witness the story, the care, and the love behind it. The emotional turning point had arrived, delicate and profound, carried in the small, intuitive actions of her companion. She felt a quiet reverence settle over her, a sense of awe for the gentle intelligence and patience of her dog. And in that moment, she knew with certainty, the story he had been guarding was not just important, it was transformative. It had changed the rhythm of their morning, the intimacy of their connection, and the way she would see him from that moment forward. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden rays across the room, and the dog rested beside her, chin on the cloth, eyes soft and trusting. She held it gently, heart full, and understood that this quiet, patient unfolding had led to an emotional truth far greater than she had imagined. She leaned back slightly, taking it all in, letting the weight of the moment settle. And as the shadows lengthened and the warm light wrapped around them, she felt the first gentle shift of clarity and gratitude, knowing that this story, their story, was only just beginning to bloom. The late afternoon had softened into early evening, and the sunlight streaming through the windows now had a golden-orange hue, warm and comforting. Shadows stretched lazily across the living room floor, curling gently around the dog and the small worn cloth he had guarded so carefully all day. The air smelled faintly of sun-warmed wood and soft fabric, carrying the quiet hum of the house around them. She had spent hours observing him, tracing the edges of the cloth, following his patient nudges, leaning into his gaze, and letting the room slow to match their rhythm. And now, a subtle clarity was forming, a realization that had been growing steadily with each small, deliberate movement he had made. She picked up the cloth again, cradling it gently in her hands. It was soft, frayed, familiar, but the meaning behind it began to reveal itself in a way that made her chest tighten with emotion. She noticed the faint pattern in the fabric, a series of small marks that told of repeated care. She could almost see the past, the afternoons spent in sunlit rooms, the small adventures outdoors, the moments of comfort and companionship embedded in its fibers. The dog rested his chin lightly against it, eyes soft and knowing, as if to say, "Do you see now? This is why I brought you here." Her heart warmed at the quiet insistence, the trust that he had placed in her to understand. She took a deep breath, feeling a slow swell of emotion rise through her chest. The story embedded in this simple object was not dramatic or tragic, it was tender, personal, and profoundly human. Somehow, through instinct and patience, the dog had been guiding her to witness it, to honor it, and to understand its quiet significance. Her eyes lingered on the cloth. There was a faint scent, a subtle texture, a softness that spoke of love and care over time. And in that realization, she understood something deeper, not just about the object, but about the dog. His patience, his intuition, his gentle insistence, all of it had been teaching her a lesson in attention, presence, and connection. She leaned closer, fingers tracing the familiar edges, and a memory stirred in her mind. She remembered a small moment from months ago, a time she had overlooked in her busy days, a time the dog had nudged something toward her, quietly insisting she notice it. She had smiled then, thought it was playful, and moved on. But now, looking at the cloth, feeling its history, she understood. He had been waiting for her to truly see, truly understand, all along. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, not sadness, but gentle awe and gratitude. She realized that this wasn't just an object or a memory, it was a bridge. A bridge between her and the dog, between past and present, between intuition and understanding. Every nudge, every tilt of the head, every patient pause had been a step along that bridge, guiding her to this heart-touching truth. The dog shifted slightly, tail brushing the carpet, eyes holding hers in quiet affirmation. She felt the weight of the moment, the significance of his careful, intuitive behavior settle over her. This was more than companionship. This was shared understanding, a gentle communication of trust and love. She whispered softly, voice barely audible, "I understand now." "Thank you." The dog blinked slowly, a subtle wag of the tail acknowledging her words. In that simple exchange, the depth of their bond became fully clear. He had shown her not just an object, but a story, a memory, a piece of life that mattered deeply to him and that now mattered deeply to her. The sunlight continued to glow, wrapping them both in a soft, golden embrace. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the story, but for him, for his quiet guidance, for his unwavering patience. She realized that the emotional connection they shared had grown stronger than ever, tethered not to words, but to presence, trust, and intuition. She held the cloth a little closer, letting the warmth of its history seep into her hands. And as the dog rested beside her, chin lightly pressed to her knee, she understood the beauty of the moment. The quiet truth behind his actions was more meaningful than she had ever imagined. No drama. No danger. No grand spectacle. Just a small, tender truth revealed through the quiet, intuitive actions of a companion she had loved all along. And in that quiet revelation, she felt a surge of love and appreciation for the simplicity, patience, and warmth that had guided her to this moment. She leaned back slightly, resting her hand over his fur, and let the room fill with the gentle glow of late afternoon light. The cloth, the dog, and the shared understanding between them felt sacred, a small miracle unfolding in ordinary time. And in that golden evening light, she realized something profound. The bond she shared with him was deeper than she had known, anchored in intuition, patience, and quiet love. The heart-touching truth had revealed itself, and it was perfect in its simplicity, gentle in its meaning, and unbreakable in its emotional depth. She smiled softly, eyes meeting his once more. "You've taught me so much today," she whispered. The dog's tail flicked softly, a small, content acknowledgement. She leaned closer, feeling the warmth of his presence, knowing that the story they shared was complete and yet only the beginning of a lifetime of quiet, intuitive understanding. The golden light of early evening softened into a warm, amber glow that filled the living room with a serene calm. Outside, the wind whispered gently through the trees, rustling leaves with a soft sigh. Inside, the dog lay curled beside her on the carpet, the worn cloth still nestled carefully between his paws. The air was heavy with quiet meaning, but light with peace. She traced her fingers along the familiar edges of the cloth, feeling its texture, its softness, its subtle imperfections that gave it character and history. Every frayed thread, every faint stain, seemed to tell a story of time spent in gentle care, of moments that mattered, of love communicated without words. She had come to understand what he had been guarding all along, not a toy, not a plaything, but a piece of life itself, a memory, a symbol, a bridge between the past and the present. The dog nudged it slightly toward her, as if reminding her to hold it, to honor it, to acknowledge its significance. She wrapped her hands gently around the small cloth and felt a wave of warmth sweep through her. In that moment, she realized the depth of his trust, his patience, and his intuition. He had guided her, step by step, toward this quiet revelation. Every nudge, every tilt of the head, every soft gaze had been deliberate, intentional, full of meaning. She looked down at him, eyes glistening with a soft, emotional clarity. "You've taught me so much today," she whispered. His ears flicked, tail brushing softly against the carpet, and he rested his chin against her knee. The simplicity of the gesture was profound. No words were necessary. Everything that mattered had been communicated through presence, patience, and quiet action. For the first time, she allowed herself to reflect fully on the morning, the afternoon, and this gentle evening. She remembered her first glance at him, thinking he was guarding a simple toy. She remembered the small nudges, the subtle gestures, the way he had held her attention without demand. And she realized that he had been asking her to see, to notice, and to feel not just the object, but the story, the care, and the love behind it. Tears came slowly, softly, as she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. Not sadness, not regret, but gratitude, profound, heartfelt gratitude. She realized that this small, intuitive companion had given her far more than a story. He had given her understanding, presence, and a reminder of what it means to notice, to feel, and to connect deeply. She leaned back slightly, letting her hand rest over his fur, feeling the warmth of his body, the gentle pulse of life beneath her fingertips. The room was still, quiet, and golden, holding them in a bubble of intimacy that made the world outside feel distant and unimportant. Here, in this small corner of her home, something sacred had unfolded. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to smile. The revelation, the heart-touching truth, had been soft, subtle, and profound. It had not needed drama, fear, or spectacle. It had arrived gently, through the patient guidance of her loyal companion, through intuition, trust, and quiet observation. And now, as she held the cloth and met his knowing gaze, she felt complete. The dog shifted slightly, curling closer to her, and she felt the warmth of connection settle fully in her chest. She remembered all the small gestures, the nudges, the pauses, the calm insistence that had guided her to this point. And she understood, finally, that this was more than a story about an object. It was a story about trust, intuition, and the quiet, unwavering bond between human and dog. The sunlight outside began to fade, spilling long shadows across the floor. She rose slowly, still holding the cloth, and allowed the dog to follow her with his eyes. He stayed close, alert but calm, as if sensing that this quiet chapter of their journey was drawing to a close. She felt a wave of gratitude for him, not just for the revelation, but for his presence, his patience, his unwavering trust, and the gentle lessons he had shared without words. She placed the cloth carefully on the small shelf by the window, letting the fading sunlight catch its edges. The dog watched closely, eyes full of gentle satisfaction. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead against his soft fur, and whispered, "Thank you for guiding me, for showing me what matters." His tail thumped softly against the carpet, steady and content. The bond between them felt unbreakable, deeper than it had ever been before. As the sky outside deepened into twilight, she sat back and let the quiet of the evening settle around them. The house was still, except for the subtle sounds of the dogs breathing and the distant wind rustling the trees. And in that stillness, she felt the culmination of the day's gentle journey, the emotional closure of a mystery revealed, a bond deepened, and a lesson learned in the softest, most profound way. The dog nudged her hand softly, a reminder of his presence and the connection they shared. She smiled, stroking his fur, and realized that the small object he had guarded was now secondary. What mattered most was the journey it had taken her on, and the trust, the intuition, the slow unveiling of meaning, and the shared moments of understanding that could never be undone. She looked at him once more, eyes bright with gratitude and warmth. "We did this together, didn't we?" she whispered. He blinked slowly, tail brushing gently against her leg, as if to agree. And in that silent acknowledgement, she felt a surge of emotion, the quiet joy and fulfillment of having truly seen, truly understood, and truly connected. As the last light of day slipped through the windows, painting the room in soft twilight, she felt a deep sense of closure. The mystery had been revealed, the emotional journey had reached its heart, and the bond between them had strengthened in ways she could not have imagined. She knew that tomorrow would bring new moments, new discoveries, and new quiet joys, but for now, in the soft glow of evening, she allowed herself to simply be. The dog rested his head gently on her lap, and she let herself sink into the warmth of the moment. The worn cloth lay nearby, its story now fully revealed, yet its presence remained a gentle reminder of trust, patience, and the intuitive wisdom of her companion. She whispered softly, This is beautiful." And for the first time, she felt the complete, unspoken truth of their bond, a quiet, heart-touching love that would last a lifetime. The room grew darker, but the warmth of the shared day lingered. She sat back, hands resting on the dog's soft fur, feeling the steady rhythm of life, intuition, and love between them. In the quiet twilight, she knew the truth: what the dog had guarded, and what he had shown her, was far more than an object. It was a story of patience, presence, and the deep, unspoken bond that connects human and companion in ways words cannot capture. And in that gentle, golden twilight, she finally understood, her heart full, her mind calm, her spirit at peace, the quiet, enduring beauty of their shared journey.